All actors hope to play a wide range of roles, and Sir Antony Sher has certainly done so. He was unforgettably disgusting as 70s sociologist Howard Kirk in the TV series The History Man.
There's only one rule, Felicity. Do what makes you happy.
And on stage has memorably portrayed Shakespearean grotesques and eccentrics, Richard III, Iago, King Lear's Fool.
Fetch us in fuel!
He's about to be seen in the UK in a production of The Tempest, premiered in South Africa, the country he left in 1968. But Sher has also played an unusual range of parts away from acting, writing novels and plays and exhibiting paintings and cartoons. However, a memoir, Beside Myself, revealed that this diverse career had brought divisions within, causing depression and addiction. Your appearance is for Prospero, which I haven't seen yet, but we can tell already it's going to be a hairy Prospero.
Yes, well, he's been on this island for 16 years, and there's no hairdresser, no shampoo. So my hair is actually longer, and beard is longer, and has really got properly wild. Taxi drivers won't stop for me anymore. They take one visual assessment and decide I'm either a tramp or a terrorist. And it can actually be quite annoying because you want to have a sign saying, I'm an actor, I'm just doing my job.
Well, it is revealing because getting the externals right, I mean, there's a famous Laurence Olivier quote that he had to get the shoes right before he could play the role, but you do adhere to that. I was watching The History Man again last night, and the accent, the leather coat, the walk, the externals are important to you.
They used to be more important. I mean, these days, if I can get by just using myself, as it were, by putting on weight or losing weight or growing beards or shaving, I'm sort of happier with that. I don't like sticking on things anymore. It's a journey that I've gone on, really, as an actor. The initial appeal of acting was that you could hide yourself away and become other people. I now believe that's complete nonsense, and acting is not about hiding, it's about revealing.
The other significance of the production of The Tempest you've just done in South Africa, a huge significance, is that it's a multiracial production. I mean, something that would have been impossible for much of recent history. Presumably that makes it considerably more emotional, does it?
Yes. I mean, the conception, the director's conception, Janice Honeyman, was, first of all, an African Tempest to try and use African magic, African ritual, African music to confront the hardest part of the play, which is the magic. But also that we should do it a colonial setting, so circa 1900, which I know has been done before, but we sort of earn a special right to do that. And so it is cast multiracially, but it is cast specific, like, not the kind of colour-blind multiracial that we do at the RSC, for example, now. So the slave, Caliban, is black. The Trinculo and Stefano, because of their jobs, they're what's called Cape Coloured, which is mixed race. I, as the colonizer, am white. My daughter's white. So it's very specific in that way.
What ho, slave Caliban! Thou, earth, thou, speak! There's wood enough within! Come forth, I say, there's other business for thee. Come, thou tortoise! When?
The Cape Times, Wednesday, December the 31st, 2008, the arts section. Jewish boy from Sea Point plays Prospero at last is the headline. We should say, given South Africa's history, that the Jewish boy from Sea Point is in quotes from you rather than from the newspaper. Yes. But it's quite significant. It was a very significant homecoming to play the role there.
It's been the most extraordinary and moving homecoming. It really has been like Cape Town itself. We had packed houses. They stood at the end, and it was like Cape Town just saying, welcome home, and, thank you for being here. Now, that's me being very sort of egotistical, because there was also John Carney standing next to me and a formidable South African cast. But it certainly touched me very deeply.
You say in that article that I always felt like a trespasser, by which you mean everything, really, to acting, to Shakespeare, to England. You genuinely felt that. You always felt that you were an outsider from all this.
Yes, in fact, even growing up in South Africa, I felt out of place, profoundly out of place, actually. There was something about, and obviously I'm talking about the white society because that's what I grew up in, but there was something about the white male of the 50s and 60s. It was this great, big, rugby-playing, beer-swilling, loud, noisy caricature, obviously. And there was me, this very weedy, small, not into sports, into the arts. And I had a really profound sense of having been born in the wrong place somehow. In fact, when I came to England 40 years ago in 1968, I felt quite at home at first. I felt there was something about the English reserve, and again, I'm caricaturing types, but there was something about that that I fitted into much better. So at first it was a sense of finding my home. And then as I ventured into classical theatre, I started to feel a trespasser again. But I guess that's just an ongoing condition with me. I'll always be doing something that I'm not sure that I should be doing, even perhaps this interview.
When you write in the book, your memoir, about the years of therapy and so on, you say, at one point in a paragraph, you say, I'm actually quite a simple case. You say, my mother thought I was a genius and my father had no real interest or belief in me at all. Now, that's reducing it to single sentences, but that was broadly true, was it?
Yes, it was. My father had no interest in the arts at all. He was, I guess, a very typical white man of his generation. He had, first of all, been brought up as an Afrikaner in the countryside, in a little settlement called Middelpost. Those people were known as Boere Jood's, Afrikaans Jews. So a very simple man, just lived for his business, liked to come home to a couple of massive scotch and sodas, and then at the weekend watched sport or listened to it on what was then called the wireless, and that was very much his life. So his third child was a Martian, I mean, we were very, very far apart. Very hard for us to understand one another, and that was mutual. In later years, we developed an affectionate relationship, thank goodness. And it was actually to do with me coming out as a gay man. When I did to my mother, she said, "We can never tell your father." She was fine with it. But then I can't remember how she did tell him. And his reaction, it's wonderful when your parents surprise you. And despite all that upbringing that he'd had, which surely could not have prepared him for having a gay son, he suddenly, a warmth opened up in him towards me and towards my then partner, Jim, and then towards Greg. And I found that so heartwarming that it it profoundly changed our relationship. But to go back to your question, I was receiving very mixed signals as a child of my mother being thrilled to bits by any drawing I did or play I was in, and my father just emanating a sense of indifference or hostility, really.
One reason for your mother's belief in you, I've interviewed many successful people for this series, but you are, I think, the first who was born under a miraculous sign.
A cowl, yes. I don't know.
So you were born with this kind of membrane over your head?
Yes. Well, the doctor said so. he, having delivered me, he came back to the bed and he said, "You've just given birth to a great man." Now, this was also very oppressive to learn about, because my mother did start to tell me about
When
this.
When were you first told this?
Well, as a kid, I suppose. But it was a difficult thing to live up to. Every time one failed at anything, there was, you see, now don't let the doctor down, don't nice Jewish mother down, as well.
And even in later life, when they came to see your performances in London, the scene would be your mother would sit there rapt with attention thinking the doctor was right and your father would be asleep.
It was as though he was attached to the house lights, the dimmer, as and he would fall, and at the end, when they dimmed back up, he came up, including, I'll never forget, they came to Richard III, which had been very successful for me in Stratford. And I ran on for my curtain call at the end, and the house stood, which was thrilling. I was thrilled that they should see it. But they were in the front row, and he was still asleep because they hadn't put the house lights back on. So that was him seeing my Richard III.
Would he make tactical comments about your performance, or just ignore it?
The only time I think he was impressed is shortly before he died. In fact, a week before he died, the RSC had a function at Buckingham Palace, and there was something about him going to Buckingham Palace where he kept relating to the country boy that had grown up in the semi-desert in South Africa, and here he was in Buckingham Palace. And I remember that touching me, that I think he'd finally convinced that perhaps I was doing all right.
What many people might expect to have been the biggest fact of growing up in South Africa in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't. You say in the memoirs, I knew nothing about the apartheid laws. Ours was an apolitical household.
Yeah.
That startled me when I read it, because it's not what we would imagine at all.
It is startling, and people find it difficult to believe. But if life is as comfortable as it was for us, and if you don't have to participate in any brutality, but you simply have to just look away, and if it's the way life is being led by the people around you, we were honestly taught as basic education that 1 and 1 makes 2, the alphabet goes ABC, blacks are an inferior form of life. And that, now, if we had been a politicized family, obviously you'd get other information. Also remember that government censorship was massive at that time. Newspapers, radio, there was no...
This is an amazing thing. There was no TV in South Africa
TV.
until 1976.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they could effectively control the way people were thinking. What made it worse for me when I became politicized here was thinking of my family history. Because all my grandparents were from Eastern Europe, 3 of them from Lithuania, and they were the second-class citizens there, and they fled anti-Semitic persecution. So they know what it feels like. They fled the country, they come to South Africa, they do well, luckily, and then they forget, they have an amnesia about what they had experienced. They don't make the obvious connection. They don't say, but we know what it was like to be like this. We're not going to do that to someone else. It takes a lot of special courage to belong to that little group, small but honourable roll call of South African Jews who took a different route. Albie Sachs, Helen Suzman, Joe Slovo, Ruth First, people who made the connection and said, no, we're going to fight apartheid.
There's an amazing account in the memoirs, and it's also touched on your fiction, of how complex this situation was, because you had a black maid in the family. Now, later on, when you do what we would regard as the good liberal thing, and you say, please don't call me Mr. Antony, Master anymore, and you try to have a relationship of equals with her, she is so educated in inferiority that she can't actually do that.
And misunderstands, thinks that I'm angry with her. And we used to write to one another. She never wrote to me again because she just didn't understand what she had done wrong in me asking, please don't call me Master Antony. It was an upsetting incident.
Your first performance was a complete disaster. There's a Jewish tradition that a young boy at his bar mitzvah has to sing. You had to do a speaking role only at your...
I had rehearsed for a year in bar mitzvah class, being bullied by a very unpleasant teacher. And the worse he bullied me and humiliated me, the worse my singing became, though I think I am just technically tone deaf. So on the weekend before the bar mitzvah, he came round to the house and said, I'm afraid this is going to be a rare thing of him speaking the service rather than... But of course the bar mitzvah teacher, this giant figure, came up against another giant figure, the Jewish mother. My son will sing. I am not having the humiliation of him speaking. So my body came to the rescue. I got severe flu a few days before, staggered up in the synagogue onto the bema, did manage to sing through it. Everyone said, oh, he's doing very well given that he's not well. And I went to bed that night comforting myself, saying I'll never have to get up in public and open my mouth again.
And being Jewish in South Africa at that time, because in many other places at that time, Jewish people were regarded as outsiders and often treated appallingly because of that. In the racial politics of South Africa, you were part of the insiders, but was there any hostility, though?
Yes, well, I encountered that when I went into the army, because we had to do national conscription. And so I had 9 months in the army, all white again. And suddenly there was a different hierarchy, which went Afrikaans-speaking Christians, English-speaking Christians, Jews, and then poor whites, who were the absolute underdogs. So suddenly the Afrikaans for Jew is Jut, which has an uncomfortable resemblance to the German, but being described constantly as you effing Jut, Jut, Jut. It was a horrible sound, and suddenly we were, bullied. The Jews were bullied, and that was my first encounter of it.
You were in charge of an empty hut.
Yes, I got very flat feet, so I tried throughout my army career to show various doctors how unsuitable I was for square bashing.
And they were all very impressed by the flatness.
They were all impressed. They said, wow, I've really never seen so flat a foot. But finally one did take pity and said, no, you better have office duties, except all the clerical positions have been taken. So they found this little office at the back of the camp. But I'd go to work each day and there was nothing to do, so I sketched. The officers found that I could do caricatures, so they used to come and sit for their caricatures. And at one stage, I think I was asked to redesign the battalion flag, which I'm very ashamed about, that in later years when South Africa went to war in Angola, one regiment might well have been carrying a flag that I had designed. Yeah, but the army, I hated it, but looking back, it has provided so much material, either in books that I've written, or the fact that I've played quite a lot of army men.
Well, I mean, your Iago, for example, or your Macbeth, were fundamentally...
Yeah.
I mean, they are in the play, but you made more of it than a lot of actors, that they are military men.
And it is quite nice being able to come to attention or stand at ease and do all those things that at the time was savagely bashed into me.
The artistic side, genes are complicated, but there seems to be some kind of acting gene in your family, because your cousin, Ronald Harwood, Oscar-winning screen playwright now, had also acted.
Well, a theatre thing, yes. I mean, Ronnie, of course, acted with Donald Wolford's company.
And then wrote The Dresser about the
wrote
experience.
The Dresser, and then he and Hal Pinter, who had also been in that company, left acting and became playwrights. Yes, it was very much a sort of inspiration for me as a child in this very unartistic household to know that a member of the family had already come to England and done well. And so I very much looked up to Ronnie.
And in South Africa at that time growing up, Esther, your aunt, she had been an actress.
Yes. Well, she's not strictly my aunt. We called her Auntie Esther, but she's, in fact, my brother's mother-in-law. And she was my elocution teacher. We called it elocution. At the time when the cultural boycott, a lot of the great young British playwrights were not allowing their plays to be done in South Africa, Pinter and Wesker. She was getting hold of copies and making me read them. And she was very interested in improvisation. She was very ahead of her time.
Were you aware being on the end of this cultural boycott, were you conscious of being cut off by the rest of the world?
No, the propaganda was so effective about how the rest of the world don't understand us and they've got it in for us, and I mean, that was all terribly effective. So one just had a sense of the rest of the world being these mean-spirited people who had taken again South Africa for some inexplicable reason.
The other thing for you was the elocution lessons were about getting rid of the South African accent. That was one of the ambitions for you.
Not in South Africa. I wasn't particularly, although I probably spoke posher than most white South Africans. It was when I arrived here and had this kind of realization about what I'd been part of in terms of apartheid, I became deeply ashamed of being a white South African. And for a ludicrous period of time, I actually pretended not to be. So we would meet as strangers. I would say I was English. Within minutes, you'd ask something like, "Where did you go to school?" And I'd be tripped up.
Or what did you watch on television when you were growing up?
Yes. Easily tripped up, and I was. And anyway, it was so stupid. I also went through a similar thing of being Jewish and being gay. I just went into so many different closets. You're hard-pressed to find a key. But you can't, it's stupid. You can't not be who you are. And now I celebrate my identity.
And the theatre, which was some kind of release when you were growing up and to start acting, but the big one, which you've suggested already, was the art. And you had this influential art teacher, Mac.
Great art teacher at school, John McCabe, Scotsman who was obviously living there. And he got terribly excited about my talent that he perceived. And at our school, you could only do commercial art, making posters. But he decided I could do fine art and really encouraged me. And then I let him down terribly because at almost the last moment in my schooling, decided to go to drama school rather than art school. And he literally stopped talking to me for the last few months at school, which hurt terribly. And I remember on the very last day of school going to the art room to say goodbye to him, and they said, "Oh no, he went home early." And I just wish he'd lived to see some of the paintings that I have done and the books that I've illustrated. But I got a sweet letter from his wife a few years ago after I'd written about it in my memoirs, and she said, he was very proud of you. You don't worry. He wasn't angry with you, so it was nice to hear.
When you came to London in 1968, huge belief from your mother that you were going to be an actor. And then, in a way which was actually quite painful to read in the book, so God knows what it's like to live through, but then it goes horribly wrong. You go off for the audition, which is supposed to get you into drama school, and they just say, no good.
Yes, so a week within arriving in London for the first time, my mother took me to Central School, where Ronnie Harwood had said was the absolute best at the time for the audition. And there's even a cine film my mother was filming of me sort of going up the steps into the Embassy Theatre at Swiss Cottage. There's no film of me coming out 10 minutes later, just as well, because my mother must have caught an expression in my face. It was so fast. We went in, we went out. The registrar put her head round the foyer where we were sitting and said, "Sir, sorry, none of you today." And you thought, this is impossible. I've travelled across the world. I was sure we'd get back to the hotel, there'd be a little message from Central saying, "Well, we didn't mean you, we just want to not upset the other people." But of course they did, it was that simple. And then luckily, we were still in time for RADA, and so I did the audition there. They didn't tell you at the time, but they sent you letters, and there were different grades of letters. Mine said, not only have you not passed the audition, not only do we not want you to try again, but we urge you to think about a different career. This is just not for you. So it was from the two top drama schools, it was just the door slammed completely. And then it was very difficult if I was to still pursue this, which my mother was determined that I should do more than I was, where to go. Luckily, we could always consult Ronnie Harwood, and he did explain that there were another group of drama schools that were extremely good, Lambda, Guildhall, and Webber Douglas, and I got into Webber Douglas and had a very happy time there, so it was perhaps meant to be.
Even when you got into Webber Douglas, there was still an unnaturalness about it. You had a thing called the wobble you suffered from when you tried to act.
I do create problems for myself, don't I? Yeah, when you arrive at drama school, there's a lot of breath control teaching. You've got to learn to breathe differently, which everyone finds very difficult. You've got to
intercostal diaphragmatic
yes,
breathing, all that kind of stuff.
that.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it. And as a result, I never had my breath in the right place. So a tiny little tremor came into my voice whenever I had to get up. Now, it wasn't not being able to sing, it was not being able to speak, so I was going to be the actor who couldn't speak. But then it was obviously just first-term nerves and went away with time.
Someone said to you at drama school that you were going to be a Lionel Jeffries type.
Yes.
Is that right?
The principal does an assessment as you leave, and he said two things. One, you're not going to come into your own till your 30s, which was depressing for a 21-year-old to hear.
Well, they turned out to be right, though.
He was absolutely right. As I turned 30, I played Howard Kirk in the BBC History Man, and shortly after that did the Mike Leigh play Goose Pimples, which were the two, on television and on stage, the two things that just lifted my whole career. The Lionel Jeffries thing never came
That's never happened. One of the strange things about being an actor to outsiders is the extent to which you're dependent on other people, just people deciding that you can play something.
Yeah.
And that was in 1979, that happened twice, and it changed your whole career. But Robert Knight, the television director, just turned up with these scripts, The History Man, and said, here are these.
Yes, because it never works like that. You never just get given 4 episodes where you're in every single scene. That don't happen. You go for auditions, there's a short list, it goes on and on forever. So Rob Knight, he'd worked with me in Rep, we'd got on extremely well, and he gave me this gift. It turned out, actually, against the wishes of the writer, because Christopher Hampton had adapted it from the Malcolm Bradbury book, adapted it very brilliantly. And unfortunately, I discovered this before saying yes, and Chris had said, the trouble is Tony isn't sexy enough. Because in the book, in the film, Howard Kirk has to sleep with every woman in the cast. And so this again struck a very kind of vulnerable side. If he'd said anything else, if he'd said his nose is a bit big or whatever, but it was that I wasn't sexy enough. Oh God, how you can't become sexy. You either have it or not. But Rob Knight said you will be fine, sexy enough. And anyway, he's a lecherous kind of slimy sex ball. So we don't want anyone conventionally handsome. So I did it.
Are you sure you don't want to see Professor Marvin?
No, Miss Hull, why should I want to see him when I'm sat out here with you? It's a beautiful typing job.
Thanks.
Only one thing. Professor Mangle's name's been left off the list of visiting speakers.
Not by me.
Just a mistake, that's all.
You want me to check with Professor Marvin?
No, that's all right. I'll raise it at the meeting. Your hair's nice.
He always likes my hair when he wants something.
Perhaps we should just add his name, save, that hassle.
You know I can't alter the agenda once it's been approved.
Of course not. I'll write you out. It's lovely to see you again.
It's an intricate creation because everything is there. The accent, the hair, the clothes, all of that. That was a spell of experimentation, was it? Just putting him together?
Yes, I mean, Malcolm Bradbury gives a pretty good description of him in the text, and I'm sure that we borrowed some of that, the kind of Viva Zapata moustache, those sideboards and the hair. And yes, and I did go to the gym a lot to try and get my unsexy body a bit sexier. And the accent, again, is prescribed by the book. So, yeah, you know, when a part is as well written as that, both in the book and the adaptation, you just immediately, the juices start going and you kind of know what he's got to be like.
Mike Leigh is more thought of now in connection with film and television, although many of those had started off on stage. And
Yeah.
you had Goose Pimples, but the process which actors have started to talk about more of working on a Mike Leigh play, I assume was the case for Goose Pimples, that
It was, very
you
much so.
go to him with, he asked you to come up with a list of people you have known.
In my list, he oddly found about 2.5 people that he was in, and we kind of stuck them together to make a person. Then we decided, and I can't remember how much it was we or how much Mike was leading the way, that this man should be from Saudi Arabia. And that's when my problem started. It meant learning everything about life in Saudi Arabia and learning to speak some Saudi and learning everything. I mean, with a character that was from here, say, you'd at least know what they had for breakfast or what they do when they go to the toilet. But everything was different. And the timing couldn't have been worse because there had just been...
Death of a Princess.
Death of a Princess fuss. And the Saudis were seriously angry with British media and were not inclined to talk to a little actor who knocked on doors in their Kensington mansions and said, I wonder if you could... I'm just doing a bit of research. It went on for months, and I was not seeing the rest of the cast. I was convinced they had all put together the play and that I would have some tiny little vignette as this mute Saudi at the end of it. But then we did make some contacts. I did learn enough to be introduced to the other characters. And it all paid off very well because the isolation that I'd been through corresponded very much to what the character experiences in the play. And it's one of the stage performances I'm proudest of having given, really.
Dance! Dance!
Yeah, but I'll dance with you.
Dance! Dance!
I don't understand.
Understand. Okay, Mar. Okay, Mar. Okay.
Is that a present?
Mar.
Are you giving that to me?
Okay. Okay.
I'll take it.
Tak. Okay. Oraks.
What is it? Is that a present, yeah?
Dance. Okay. Oraks.
I'm gonna take it.
Tak.
And we talk about very easily, as critics, as journalists, about breakthrough roles. Now, 30 years ago, in fact, those two, History Man and then just after that, Goose Pimples. Did you think in each case, this is something special I've got here?
Well, I was aware that my status changed slightly. In fact, what it led to, and it was specifically the History Man, was a call from the RSC, Terry Hands, saying, really like the History Man, can we meet? And that began the RSC, which I've sort of never really left.
Richard III, which was the Shakespearean breakthrough role, and you wrote and illustrated a whole book about that, but that shows us which is a way that not many actors work, I think, because they don't have the artistic ability. But Richard III was the best example of the way in which you use art to get into a part.
Well, that was to do with trying to find a physical image, specifically physical, because he is described as being severely disabled. So you have to find some way of doing that. So I embarked on a long research trip visiting homes for the disabled, sometimes just being inspired by mountain formations, all sorts of things, before we hit upon, we being the director, the designer and myself, the fact that whenever the other characters curse Richard in the play, they use animal imagery, hellhound, bunchback toad, And Queen Margaret's curse is "you bottled spider." I had been on crutches for real from an accident a couple of years earlier, so I knew something about them. And so we started to experiment with me being on crutches. And the designer, because the costumes were medieval, you know, they're those long bits that kind of hang from the elbow. So now it was six-legged. And we just began very cautiously in rehearsal to see whether this would enable me to do everything that I have to do in the play. One of the most exciting early discoveries was that far from hindering Richard, he could become the fastest man in court, because you can cross the stage on crutches in great bounds, faster than anyone can walk. And that he's permanently carrying two very nasty weapons, because you can hit people, you can stick the crutch under Lady Anne's skirt and get very suggestive there. And they just yielded again and again and again until we finally one day said we can stop saying that we're experimenting with this, we're doing it.
Deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world, scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable the dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why, I, in this weak piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to spy my shadow in the sun, and descant on mine own deformity. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain, and hate the idle pleasures of these days.
The fact you knew about being on crutches, again, it was an illustration of how physical an actor you were, because that was playing Fool in King Lear with Michael Gambon as the king. And, I mean, Achilles' tendon was going to snap at any point, but it was, I mean, I saw that performance twice, and it was an incredibly physical performance.
And again, we played him as twisted, as deformed, because of the cruelty of court jesters often being dwarves or disabled people, and then you paint a funny clown's face on them, and that contrast is rather great for the Fool in that tragedy. So yes, I had a very twisted feet position. My whole body was bad, and at that time was not good at going to the gym and was not good at finding out what might injure you and might not. And I'm absolutely sure the Achilles tendon came from that, holding oneself in that position.
We touched on this earlier, but the way in which a lot of actors are shy, which is counterintuitive because nobody really believes this, but it's true of a lot of performers that it's to do with that possibility of disguise. They can be something in public that they could not be in private.
Yes. And it can suddenly hit you, the strangeness and the scariness of standing in front of 1,500 people. A few years ago, I went through a very bad period of stage fright. It often happens later in your career rather than early in career. You sort of can't afford stage fright when you're young. You know, it's too hard becoming an actor. If you're going to be scared, just, run. But a lot of actors will tell you that slightly later in their career they get stage fright. And it is a truly alarming thing to suddenly be in the middle of a performance. It happened to me during the period when I was playing Iago, who's a huge, it's what's the third biggest part in Shakespeare, with huge amounts of soliloquies and I went through terrible battle where you become re-aware of what you're actually doing, instead of it just being your job. Oh, I go on stage in front of 1,500 people and I play Iago. You're suddenly, what am I doing? This is frightening. And you get all these different voices in your head, which makes it very, very confusing. You've got the voice that's saying the lines. You've got another voice saying you're going to mess up any moment now, it's going to happen now. You've got another voice saying, go away, to the second voice. And you have this war in your head. I used to go into the wings and literally do that to kind of shake the voice, and then they would go away again and come back.
You see, again, I think it's counterintuitive.
May I
because-
just finish, because it's quite important for anyone coming to see me as Prospero.
You are over it,
that
yeah.
I cured, and what cured me was doing a one-man show, my show
Prima,
about Prima Levi, Prima. That was a real sort of kill or cure and cured.
This is the amazing thing, because it is not the advice you would give to anyone suffering from stage fright. You would say, do one of Beckett's wordless one-minute plays. But
yes.
So you must have been terrified, were you, in Prospect?
The early rehearsals were very strange. It's a very odd thing doing a one-man show. I'd spoken to several veterans of one-man shows like Simon Callow and David Suchet, and they said, "Oh, you're going to love it. It's fantastic." Then I realized, of course, their one-man shows have an interaction with the audience with a lot of laughter. Mine had as many laughs as you would expect from a piece about living for a year in Auschwitz. So it created a strange silence in the audience, even in the audience in the rehearsal room, with just you heard yourself speaking and going on this journey. So I remember finding it a very strange experience, but different from the stage fright. And there was something, now this is going to sound precious, I don't mean it, but there was something about the material that was so sacred and so had to be delivered with care and properly. There was something in the project that was so much bigger than my own ego, that whenever I got frightened during the long journey it went on here and on Broadway, and Cape Town we played and then made the film of it, all I would have to think of was Prima Levi himself and how there was no space for my petty feelings.
During the daytime, our nerves, our fear, somehow made it all tolerable. The hunger, the thirst, the violated modesty because of the absence of toilets. But the hours of darkness were like never-ending nightmares. Again and again sleep was interrupted by noisy and futile arguments, curses, cries, kicks and punches delivered blindly. And then someone would light a candle, and its little flicker would show strange human mass spread over the floor, sluggish, aching, rising in sudden convulsions, collapsing again.
The body is a strange thing. Just at the first preview, there was just one little sign from your body that all was not well.
Yes, that's right. Invisible to the audience, but certainly me aware of it. And I remember going to my therapist at the time. I still go to her, art therapist, Marietta Young, and saying to her, everything's going really well with this, conquered everything, but I've got this little shiver in my leg. And she said, well, isn't it better that it's down your trouser leg instead of, in your hand or face? Or she said, it's in your trouser leg, nobody can see it. Leave it there, it's fine. The body is just kind of giving you a little sense of being alive.
Art therapy, how does that work? You draw, do you?
Yeah, that came about when I was in the clinic for cocaine dependency in '96. And they had art therapy as one of the things they offered. I immediately found that, and I'd been doing therapy for many years, ordinary therapy for many years, that somehow there was a connection that came straight from my guts and bypassed all the sort of nonsense that you might use as decoys in ordinary therapy. And so I just stayed with it ever since leaving the clinic, and I still find it a terrific thing.
And the cocaine addiction, again, if someone had come to see you, I think at the height of it, you were in Pam Jones's Stanley at the National Theatre playing Stanley Spencer. Your fellow actors, the audience, they would not have known about this.
No, but although I report in the memoirs that I did take it for one or two of the last performances, because I knew that when the performances were coming to an end, I was booking into the clinic that Monday. Apart from that, I never used to act with cocaine.
Right.
It was not helpful. I could paint, in fact, paint rather well, unfortunately, on cocaine. But I never wrote on it or acted on it. And for me, you know, inside me there is still the shy, introverted little kid from Sea Point. And cocaine took that away. I was 6 foot tall. I looked like Brad Pitt. I was, you know, fabulous. That's where it was very dangerous for me.
There's little labels that they have listing the materials an artist has used. There's an amazing one on one of yours, which is cocaine and your father's ashes.
Yes. Yes, that was a big self-portrait. Well, it's called The Male Line, and it's actually me and my father and my grandfather, and me at 2 different ages. That painting was painted on cocaine. My dad had died recently, and I had a jar of his ashes, which we hadn't yet decided what to do with. So along with the oil paints, there was some ashes and some cocaine, which someone remarked at the time was a very expensive new art material.
And you're still in therapy now, but since that period,
I've been clean, thank God, touch wood.
Most actors have a play that they don't mention. It's the Scottish play. The one you don't mention, which is unusual and you leave out of CVs, is Twelfth Night.
Yes, well, I was just terrible as Malvolio. Thank you for bringing it up. It's the, I suppose, the one time with Shakespeare, certainly, that I just failed completely. Made a really stupid mistake, which is don't play him funny. He is the funniest character in all of Shakespeare as long as you don't play him funny. Play him very, very seriously, because that's what he thinks he is. And I played him clownishly and failed, and that's all we're going to say about that.
Well, no, we're going to say one more thing, which is the reason I brought it up is that it shows it's part of the insecurity of being an actor. Even with experience, with a provenly great role, good directors, whatever, it can still go horribly wrong.
Of course it can. Particularly with Shakespeare, because every time you start a Shakespeare, you go on this tremendously exciting but risky voyage of how are you going to do it. Because you can do it so many different ways, and people have been for 400 years. You certainly don't want to do it like the famous ways you've seen it done. So you kind of have to find your way, and you can take a wrong turning, and it happened with that one.
Your generation of actors have had to bear this slur lovey, which is thrown about all the time, and which means overexcitable, hysterical, silly politically, or going for easy political solutions.
And doing such easy work, yes.
Has that irritated you?
Hugely. And what I'd love to do with someone who thinks I'm a lovey is just ask them to learn one of the big Shakespeare parts, whichever they want, the whole of it. And then I want to stand with them in the wings as they're about to step out and start, saying, now is the winter of our discontent. And I'll happily clear up whatever mess they accidentally deposit around them. And then I'd like them to go through the performance, and then I'd just like to debrief them afterwards about how much that felt like being a lovey. Because, that's such an old-fashioned, it's so old-fashioned, and it didn't even apply to actors of previous generations who worked hard. The job is hard. And yes, it can be rewarding, but it is also scary, and it's just stupid to trivialize it like that.
And we're in a period of history where unemployment is going to be very high again, but that aspect of acting that very considerable actors, you think, I haven't seen so-and-so for a while, and then you ask someone who knows them, and you discover they've been out of work for years.
Yes.
I mean, it's the very particular aspect of that profession, because you're dependent on other people casting you.
It's a very tough and cruel aspect, and it's why when young people ask me about whether they should become an actor, I always say no, absolutely not. I'll paint the blackest picture possible, because of course if they're determined to, they still will. But the other worry about theatre in the future is that young kids coming out of drama school don't want to go into theatre anymore. They all want to be film or TV stars. And so when the RSC, for example, have to audition for a new production of Romeo and Juliet, it's always really hard finding that whole group of young actors that can play those parts, because they're not interested anymore, like certainly my generation and before, where you'd go round the reps and play the parts, and your ambition was to work your way through Shakespeare. They don't have that anymore. And if that's not counted in some way, it's going to be the end of theatre, isn't it?
Now, why do they not have that? Is that because of teaching, or because film seems easier, more glamorous, TV and film?
Yeah, more glamorous, you become rich and famous, I guess.
You expressed fears about the future of theatre because actors not wanting to do theatre. If from your position of eminence in your 60th year you were to address these young actors, I mean, what would you say? I mean, what is it that they're missing?
They're missing Shakespeare. They're missing the greatest playwright that has ever been and probably will ever be. It's a cliche. Of course it's a cliche to say that, but the more I work on Shakespeare, the more gobsmacked I am by what he does. I mean, Prospero, what an extraordinary, complex man he creates there. And yes, one can feel that there's possibly some self-portrait in there. It's the closest I've ever felt to what Shakespeare might have been like. And it's actually something about the anger in the part that feels particular. You know, we talked much earlier about my uncomfortableness with my family history, turning from persecuted people to persecutors. Well, of course, that's exactly what happens to Shylock. So once you have done Shylock, I remember it actually changing my relationship with my family, and I could be less furious with them. I could understand them better.
You gave something fascinating away in your when working on The Winter's Tale, which was that it was inspired by your deep envy of Simon Callow, the actor.
Well, I was having to tap into jealousy, which that play is all about. In the play, of course, it's sexual jealousy. And I found that I wasn't really particularly a sexually jealous person, but that the way I could source jealousy was these feelings I'd had about Simon when we were starting our career. A lot of similarities. He was brought up in South Africa, some of his childhood, his birthday's the day next to mine. He's gay as well. And we were going up for the same parts. He was tending to get them and was tending to become very famous. And I think a lot of actors have this sense that someone else is having their career.
Now, a lot of actors have told me this, that there's always one actor who gets the parts that you expect to get, or you're sent a script and their name has been crossed off at the top of it.
Yes. So, but the jealousy was really like it's described in Othello and Winter's Tale. It was like this poison. I could actually spend time just fixating about Simon in a way that was completely crazy and unhealthy. I had to leave a theatre once because I heard his very distinctive laugh. I had become Salieri to his real-life Mozart, because Mozart
was one of the parts he got that you should have had, yeah.
So there we are. Simon and I are now best of friends and laugh merrily about this little chapter in our youths.
Sexuality, which we talked about, but it's not necessarily that unusual. Elton John was briefly married, but you were engaged and married in your 20s.
Yes.
To two different women, I should say.
Yeah, I fought very hard not to be gay. It was so unfamiliar from any childhood examples. And even here, remember, I arrived in 1968, so it was only a year after the Wolfenden report and the law changed, decriminalising homosexuality. And I was still getting shocks. I remember going to see John Schlesinger's film, Sunday, Bloody Sunday, wonderful film. And very early on in the film, Peter Finch and Murray Head, who are lovers, though the boy is also bisexual with Glenda Jackson. Anyway, they're lovers, and they meet together, and they just immediately kiss, as lovers would. The entire audience in Leicester Square screamed as though they had just witnessed a snuff movie. I mean, it was a scream that went through my soul. So even here, it was not yet a completely comfortable thing. So throughout my drama school time, I lived with an American girl, and we were going to get married. Then she had to go back to America, and then I married a lady up in Manchester where I was doing a postgraduate course. And yes, we remained married for quite a short time, and now good friends but divorced. And then I got married again in 2005 when that wonderful civil partnership law came in here.
A lot of the recent Shakespeare roles, Winter's Tale, Macbeth, directed by Greg Doran. This is the Richard and Judy question, which is the separation of the professional and private lives. But it was difficult at first because one of your other books refers to the difficulty of working together.
We had to learn how to do it. That first experience was Titus Andronicus, co-production of the National and the Market Theatre in Joburg. And we'd never worked together, and we didn't know that you've got to leave it behind in the rehearsal room. So we would go back and carry on talking, and by now, of course, it had several gin and tonics, and then crockery would start to fly, and glasses were smashed once in the swimming pool, which, since Greg had done the smashing, I said to him was the most dangerous thing you could do, is break a glass in a swimming pool, and of course we fought a bit more after that. And then the next one that we did together must have been Cyrano, and we just made an absolute rule that you finish rehearsals, and you, in the drive home and at home and in the drive in the morning, the subject is actually forbidden. You actually are not. You might, on the drive-in the morning, say, I wonder if I could just raise a tiny, teensy-weensy point about today's rehearsal, which will not be contentious. And then you might be granted permission or not. But we stick to it really strictly. And since then, it's been a pleasure to work together.
It's a rough old world still in many ways, but without getting too sentimental, when you look back, the fact that you can go as a gay man in a civil partnership to South Africa to appear in a multiracial production, the way in which things have progressed in your own lifetime, it is a remarkable thing. It's
a lovely, heartwarming thing. I don't know, there was something about coming full circle with the Tempest in Cape Town. Something about the welcome that Cape Town gave me that just kind of put to rest a lot of ghosts from the past when I was so unhappy in Cape Town for many different reasons as a child. And suddenly in this last month or so, I've been so happy in Cape Town, even to the extent that we're thinking of buying a second home there. It's been an immensely satisfying sense of a journey coming full circle at this point in time.
And it's the opposite side of the insecurity of acting, that if people want you to go on doing it, there are these many extraordinary stories of actors working until literally days before their death.
Yes. I don't think I'll be one of them. I think I'll be in a big studio somewhere, painting, and Greg will be earning the money.
Sir Antony Sher, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go with the flow and drift off with Piano Flow, a new weekly dose of the world's most soothing music. Listen via BBC Sounds.